September 16, 1962, the resolution read in effect that the South Louisville Christian Church would give $12,000 as a down payment on 2 acres of land. This property would be used to build Southeast Christian Church. This is another expression of the generosity and the spirit of unity of the wonderful Christian people at South Louisville. Our congregation at Southeast will ever be grateful for the fine start the South Louisville Church has given us. The responsibility of justifying their confidence now rests with us.
This is the most crucial decision this church has ever made.
They might defiantly announce, I would never come to Southeast Christian Church. We will come to you.
I've never been more committed to making sure that this church will love people one at a time.
I was blessed with very godly parents. We went to church every Sunday. I had an older sister who was going to Cincinnati Bible College. She said, why don't you get away and come down and visit me? 7 hours away, so I went and visited her, and she lined up a great trip for me. I remember walking away from the school saying, boy, that's a great place to go to school. It's too bad I don't want to be a preacher.
My name is Larry Dabney. We went to South Louisville Christian Church, where my uncle was the preacher, Olin Hay. They had a board of visionaries, and they realized that the population was moving to southeast Jefferson County, and they said, we need to put a church out there.
Well, I can remember in November of '62, I was only 13 at the time, but I remember as we embarked on this new adventure to come out and be part of this new church plant. For my brother and I, being younger, and we had friendships at South Louisville, we had a little trepidation, but we were willing to come along and see what it was going to be like.
My uncle, the Sunday before we left, in South Louisville, had everybody stand up that's going to go out to the new church. And about 50 people stood up, and he told us later that he looked out and he thought, there's 3 of my elders. One's my brother-in-law, the choir director, the worship leader, my own sister, my nephew. He's like, this is going to be painful.
When we first got to Southeast, it was in the cafeteria of Goldsmith Elementary. We were a little taken aback because it didn't have really much of a church feel to it. There wasn't any stained glass around and big chandeliers overhead. So we were having to rely on the faith that we found in that cafeteria environment to make it feel like a church to us.
My name is Bob Russell, and I came to be the only pastor of Southeast Christian Church in 1966. I was 22 years of age. I went to school 4 years, and then I took a little country church my senior year, Monterey Christian Church, about 35 miles outside of Cincinnati. I went on the weekends. When I graduated, I said to the elders of that church, about 70 people in the church, I said, I don't want to be a bivocational preacher. Would you consider hiring me full time? Well, they'd been a weekend church for 100 years. That was a big change for them. They had a 2-hour elders meeting and finally decided, we're paying you $50 a week to come out on the weekend. If you will come full time, we think we can afford $70 a week. But they said, if we're going to pay you that kind of money, we want you to agree to stay for at least a year. I said, that'll be no problem. I'll stay for at least a year.
Jesus said, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls.
I had been at Monterey Christian Church for about 3 months, full time. And I was at the conference on evangelism at Taft Auditorium in Cincinnati. This guy walks up to me, I'd never met. He said, my name is Butch Dabney, and I want to tell you about a new church that we've started in Louisville.
My grandfather Butch, when they planted Southeast, I can't imagine the time and energy and sacrifices to do that in that time period as well. He was just someone that loved people out of his love for Jesus. In the late 30s, he was a traveling song evangelist. And my grandmother had saved these promotional little posters that had the preacher and then my grandfather's picture and what songs he'd be singing and the sermon titles that, one of the sermon titles was, Can a Woman with Bobbed Hair Go to Heaven? And that they were going around preaching grace. And when he passed away, my grandmother gave me his personal little hymnal. He handmade little leather binder from the late 30s of all the songs he would sing, the sheet music printed out and all his little notes in it. And she gave my brother his personal kind of travel journal from those tent revivals. And he would write notes in this journal about the churches they would visit. And he would talk about whether he felt the church was healthy or not and his prayer for the churches. But just going through that and seeing his heart for the church. And he would visit these places and was longing that they would have good leadership. Someone would say bad leadership.
My dad, Butch Dabney, he just had a heart for the Lord and serving, and he loved music, and he could, do his expression in music and lead in the choir, which was not an easy thing to do, but he just had a heart that loved the Lord.
I can't help but remember the first Sunday we had 100. We were excited then and didn't realize that you ain't seen nothing yet.
This Sunday of January 5th, 1964 was a beautiful Lord's Day. Bible school attendance was 115. For church, there was 133 present. Brother H.W. Dabney presented a beautiful solo for the special music.
We sat down on a couch in the lobby, and he pours out his heart about how dedicated the people are, how the church has an ideal location on the east end of Louisville, how they've got great leadership and great music and has awesome potential, and they've got 120 people, and it was a glowing picture of this church. And I said to him, that sounds great, but I made a commitment that I would stay at my church for a year because I'm the first full-time minister. So it can't be God's will for me to break a promise and come to Southeast. I hope you find the right person. 6 months later, one Sunday morning, these two ladies came out, and little country church, you shake hands with everybody, and they came out the door, and I could tell by the way they were dressed, they weren't part of our country congregation. And they sheepishly said, we're from Louisville, Kentucky. And in my mind, right then, I knew what had happened. They had gone through some other guys and they still couldn't find anybody, and they were back down to me. And so that night, Butch Dabney called me from Louisville and he said, we know you've got a commitment to stay for a year, and that's about 3.5 months that's going to be up. We may be willing to wait for you if you will come down and take a look at this church. Well, you got to understand, I'm in my sweet spot in Monterey, Ohio. I grew up in the country. This is a little country town. Some new people had come to church, some friends my age, and I was very much in my element in that environment. But I can't say I hesitated a long time because it was so obviously a call from the Lord, and it was a great opportunity. I knew when I came, I was way out of my league. I mean, I'd grown up in the country. This is in the city. I had a BA degree from Bible college. There's all kind of people with PhDs in this church. I grew up in a little church. This church had the opportunity to grow big. And I knew when I came here, I was going to have to be a serious student, and I was going to have to grow.
He really was as deep at 23 or 24, almost as he is now. He was just a wonderful preacher.
I remember when Bob first came for his trial sermon. Well, I thought he was real handsome.
The first time I saw him, he was driving a red Mustang convertible, and I thought, my goodness, we can't afford that kid.
When I first came to Southeast, the first building was under construction, but the church met in the basement of a house right next to the new construction. And it was crammed with chairs. The ceiling was about 7.5 to 8 foot. They couldn't get a preacher who was too tall, so that gave me an advantage. And I remember after a couple of weeks trying to rearrange chairs to get as many chairs as we could get in that basement. And when you preach in a basement and a place is packed with people, it's an exciting place to preach. And the church had such potential, and everybody knew that it was about to explode. So we were in that basement for 6 months after I came. And when we finally moved into the building, we exploded up to over 200 people the first Sunday, and we were so excited about that.
But nothing can remove our hope because it is permanent. And when there is hope in the future, there is power in the present. And when you build your faith and your hope on Jesus Christ, you're not out on a limb. You're on the solid rock.
My name is Jack Coffey. In 1976, I moved to Fern Creek area, and my neighbor invited me to Southeast. I just was really impressed with Bob. Of course, I was really impressed, most of all, by his preaching. I had been in church my whole life. My mom was an organist in the church. I'd been very active in church, been in a lot of churches doing ministry. So I'd heard a lot of preachers. But Bob was in a small church, and not many people knew about him. And I was blown away by the preaching.
You know, one of the things about Bob Russell is the genuineness and authenticity of who he is, both on stage and off. You know, there's an old saying that says, you don't want to see how the sausage is made or you'll never want to eat it. And if you apply that to the church world, if some people saw what the real life of the senior pastor or their worship pastor or their student pastor, et cetera, you might be a little disillusioned. Not so with him. Behind the curtain, he was the same man that he was on stage preaching.
I always felt like the church was so far beyond where I was. And it was a challenge for me to try to keep up. Then I had some guys who were friends who were dedicated to humbling me. And most of all, I had a wife who wasn't all that impressed with me either. One of the ways that Judy, the church owes her a debt of gratitude is that she was supportive of me when I wasn't as an attentive a husband as I should have been. Because I came here, I was focused on church, and I'd bring her to church and forget about her till it was time to go home. I sometimes ask her to wait in the car while I counseled someone. I let phone calls interrupt us at mealtime. I took work from church home, and I just want to veg out at home and not pay much attention. And she was so patient during that time. But several things happened to wake me up, and one evening I got a phone call. I was home by myself. I got a phone call from Judy telling me she was going to get home late. They got hung up at work. But I answered the phone so late that the answering machine kicked on and recorded my conversation. 10 minutes later, I looked and the red light was on. I got a message, and I pushed it. I had to listen to the conversation between me and my wife, and I couldn't get over the lilt, the energy in her voice, and the absolute deadness in mine. The conversation went something like, "Bob, you having a good day?" "Okay." "What are you doing?" "Reading newspaper." "Well, do you want me to bring something home, or you want to go out and eat? What do you want to do?" "Doesn't matter." I knew if that had been the average person of the church, my energy level would have been, "I'm doing great, reading this article about U of L football. Don't hurry home, don't want you to have an accident." But my wife, the person who means the most to me, really, I'm just grunting at her. So I made a commitment. That's going to change. I'm going to be more energetic, more focused at home. Because of some effort, I think we both improved and grew in our relationship.
It goes back to the very beginning. I can remember that everybody involved wanted to do everything first class. And then when Bob came, Bob, he was an incredible preacher, but he preached the Bible. And between those two things, the worship service done well, Bob preaching the Bible, people came like, this is really good. I need to bring my relatives, my coworkers, my neighbors. And every week you just see new people coming, people that you'd never seen before, and just kept going, larger and larger. And I can remember after growing pretty much to hear people say, well, Southeast, they're just, all they care about is the numbers, attendance. And I thought about it, you know what? We did, because every number is a person and a soul So yeah, let's be concerned about the numbers.
When I was in Bible college, my wife sang in a girls' trio representing the school, and I went with them one weekend to Flora, Illinois. And the church had 400 people, most people I'd ever seen in church. And I remember saying to Judy when we drove home, that church is too big. The preacher doesn't know everybody. That's not really a church. God has a sense of humor. Little did I know what would happen.
January 22nd, 1967, dedication service of new sanctuary. Welcome and recognition, Brother Bob Russell. Attendance, 488.
Well, when we moved into our church building, it began to grow fairly gradually at first, and pretty soon, after several years, we were 400 people. And we said, okay, we've filled the building up. What people don't understand, that on the one hand, there's a temptation to get the big head because the numbers are growing. On the other hand, there's an inclination to feel so inadequate because you don't remember people's names, you forget things, you don't know all that's going on. We had a men's retreat at Otter Creek Park, and all the men were invited to come, and we had a discussion about, do we want to grow to be a large church, or should we divide and have two smaller churches? We concluded on that retreat, you go 10 minutes in any direction and you can find a Christian church of medium size, that maybe God wanted this to be a larger church. We weren't thinking about thousands, but we were thinking about 500-600. And so we went to 2 services, and then pretty soon 3 services, and we're cramming people in and trying to find some way to park cars. We had 1.5 acres of ground, so we secured Wallet's Nursery across the street. Then we began running shuttle buses from a nearby shopping center.
I do remember at the first building, we would park at the nursery across the street, Wallet's Nursery. And so they let us park in there Sunday mornings, got to walk across, and then at that building, the line out the door was out the door, down the sidewalk to Hikes Lane. It was just, you wait for the next service and people come in and out, and it wasn't easy to go to Southeast. You had to really want to go.
We were growing so fast, so we were parking everywhere, and we decided the answer to our problem was to buy the lot next door.
If we're going to continue to win people to Christ, we've got to make some adjustments. We don't have enough land. We need a lot more parking. So we had a guy that lived next door, had about 1.5 acres. His property was worth $70,000.
We offered the guy $100,000. He wouldn't budge. So we offered him $250,000.
We offered him $250,000 for his property worth $70,000. We knew he'd accept that. And we said, I'll tell you what, if he turns that down, that's going to sign from God that we're supposed to relocate. Well, he turned us down. Now, we're still having some indebtedness, but we appointed a relocation committee to look for some place for the possibility of relocating. And we had about 800, 900 people at the time.
Thank goodness God closed that door, because it made us get a vision for where we wanted to be in the future. I started looking at the numbers when I was asked to head up the other campus.
Jack Coffey was appointed as building chairman. And so he dedicated himself to really making sure this building happened.
So I started looking at the growth numbers and the percentages per year. We decided we can't serve the Lord here because we won't be able to minister to anybody.
Well, they came back several weeks later and said, we have found 20 acres of property. It is a half mile down the street. You all know where it is. They're in front of Myers School, and it's available for the first time, but we need $315,000 down within 2 months or we're going to lose it. Then we need to act immediately. Well, everybody got excited about relocation. Everybody voted for it. Then we said, how are we going to come up with $315,000? And one of our elders said, I know what let's do. Let's come into next month's meeting and let's just take up an offering among the elders, the deacons, and the staff with a goal of $315,000 cash. And put it down, buy that property, tell the congregation then what we've done, and let that be an incentive for them to give $1 million offering in the fall to be seed money for a new building. He said, I've done some calculating here, and there are 55 elders, deacons, and staff members. That boils down to about $3,500 for family next month. Any questions? But I began to hear reports of guys canceling Florida vacations, selling second cars, delaying retirements. Some went out and borrowed money. We came into next month's meeting, and the tension was really thick because we didn't know what each other had done. And Jack Coffey came into that meeting wearing dark sunglasses. He had a tin cup in one hand and a cane in the other. He wanted everybody to know he'd made big sacrifices.
You got to make sacrifices when you're part of the leadership, and a lot of them are financial.
We took up the offering, and he said they came back 20 minutes and said, well, we didn't get $315,000. We got $355,000 cash. And the place exploded like somebody just hit the final basket of the NCAA tournament. And we said, we better pray. Thank God. And we all went to our knees. Thank God. At the end of the prayer, somebody said, well, guys, I'll be outside polishing shoes, I guess. Somebody said, what shoes? You still got shoes? Pass a plate to him again. He didn't give enough. And if you'd have walked in there, you thought everybody just received a $10,000 bonus, but in truth, had just given it away. But it was that generosity, that sacrifice, that later the congregation gave well over $1 million, and that's how we bought that property and built a new building on that, because God shut the door of the property next door, and God opened the door through a vision of one guy who said, let's take up an offering among the leaders and make it happen.
Bob Russell came to me one day and said, now, we don't want too big a room because, we're going to have Sunday nights, Wednesday night. We need 1,500 seats.
I said, Jack, I'm not on the building committee, which is wise. The preacher shouldn't be on the building committee. But I said, I have two requests. I like the building sitting in a semicircle, but I also want to request that we not make it any larger than 1,500 seats. With 1,500 seats, we can have two services. We can have 3,000 people. We'll never get bigger than 3,000. But if we have more than 1,500 seats, we're going to rattle around in there on Wednesday night and Sunday night.
I said, Bob, your faith is too small. You go preach. I'll take care of the building program.
When Jack said, you just keep preaching, we'll build, I wasn't real happy with that because I believed that I was right. We didn't need to be bigger than that. But there had been so many times that God had done more, immeasurably more than I asked or imagined. And I wasn't the biggest visionary at all. It was the guys surrounding me that kept pushing.
In the book of Matthew, the 28th chapter, verses 18 through 20, we have what is commonly called the Great Commission. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I will be with you always to the very end of the age. There are going to be some of you who say, I don't feel like doing that. The church does not exist as a social club, or as a political force, or as a welfare agency. The church exists primarily to proclaim the gospel, to win people to Jesus Christ, and then to instruct them in the principles of the New Testament. And until we can convince men that there's a vast difference between Christianity and churchianity, we still have a mission to fulfill.
So we raised $1 million, a little over $1 million for seed money for the next building. But of course that building is going to cost $7 million. So we've got to borrow some money. We've got to make some commitments over and above. We're 4 months from that building being finished. And the elders came to me and said, Bob, we're $400,000 short of occupying the building. We're not talking about furniture. We're just talking about occupancy permit. So we'd like for you to announce to the congregation that in 2 weeks, we're going to have another special offering. Our goal is going to be $400,000. I said, I don't think we can do that. Number one, we just had $1 million offering a little over a year ago, and I think the well's dry. Number two, remember we told the people that that was a once-in-a-lifetime sacrifice. And the elder said, well, you go back and tell them this is the second annual once-in-a-lifetime sacrifice because we got to have it just to occupy the building. So we announced the congregation, there's going to be a special offering in several weeks. We took up the offering, and the chairman of the finance committee called me on Sunday afternoon and said, we got $360-some thousand. Well, that's fantastic of a short notice, but it wasn't 400. And we were coming back on Sunday night and going to announce the total. Well, we announced $360-some thousand, and everybody applauds. They seem to appreciate it. The worship leader got up and said, let's sing some Thanksgiving songs. And he said, let's sing Count Your Many Blessings. We started singing. He stopped in the middle and said, somebody over in this section, tell us what you're thankful for, or my family. Somebody in this section, well, the offering today. I'm over here. How about our country? And while he was doing that, little Emery Cockerham got up out of the third row and walked forward and said, may I say something? Now, I'm sitting over here on the side, and I'm a structured person, and nowhere in my text sheet does it say Emery Cockerham gives a testimony. And so the worship leader handed him the microphone. He said, I'm just sitting here tonight thinking it's a shame we didn't reach our goal. Oh, no, Emery, don't bring that up. He said, I think if we just took up another offering tonight, we could come up with another $36,000. You don't have to give it tonight. Just put an IOU in there or something.
And Bob is sitting over on the pew on the front row, and he's got the guy, he does not like to go off script. And I see an opportunity. I'm the building chairman. I'm sitting back there. I jump up, run up front. I said, that's a great idea, Emery. The elders in the room, I said, you guys got any objections? I looked at every one of them. They said, no.
He has an impromptu elders meeting in front of about 500 people. And so they said, where's the offering plate? I don't know. I think they're back. And the whole service just fell apart. It's a terrible thing when the Holy Spirit takes over.
We took up an offering, and we said, if you don't have any money, put an IOU in the pot. They went off, counted 67,000.
This place exploded. I mean, it exploded. People, hands over their head, cheering. I saw one of our elders, Bob Ott, and my son, Rusty, standing up on the back pew because they didn't want to miss anything. I got up and I said, I don't know what happened here, but I think we better pray. Everybody went to their knees. You could hear a pin drop. An hour after that service, people were still standing around in little groups, going from group to group, saying, can you believe what happened here tonight? No, I don't know. I gave away my house. I'm not sure what happened. But I mean, it was just amazing, the sacrifice that people made because the momentum of what God was doing here was so fantastic.
And the congregation's growing internally and externally. We're all growing spiritually because we're seeing God work just like every day. These are miracles. Seeing God work, we've always scratching our head, where'd that money come from?
When we left this building in 1987, Palm Sunday, we had the charter members standing on the steps, and we had a parade of different classes that started in the parking lot and walked past the charter members and told them thank you for starting, because church meant so much to everybody.
I got to be a part of that, that we're moving from one location to the other, and all the kids and the students were out front walking down Hikes Lane, which I thought was awesome. And they're singing and you're laughing.
Just remember how exciting it was to walk up there and not be ashamed, and to go to the big building, and everybody's chattering. You just couldn't talk fast enough, but everybody was very excited about that.
We went from 2,000 to 5,000 in less than a year. And I said, everything looks like it's great. I'm not saying I'm burned out, but I'm overextended. I need some help.